And here we are on the final part. It's going to be the ear. Now, it might seem complex and convoluted and weird and twisty and organic, but we can find a way around that. We're going to simplify everything down so that we can always remember what's actually happening in the ear. And the reason it's important to learn at least once, slowly and carefully, is so that you can at least indicate it and even subtly imply it instead of having to paint it in detail. But it requires knowing the form and the geometry, and that is exactly what we're about to dive into. So the first thing that we're going to do is the overall breakdown of the basic geometry. So you know me, I like to go big then small, macro to micro. And in this case, the big overall shape as a low polygon object is just kind of a slab. Well, let's just do it over here real quick. It's just like a potato chip, but not quite, with a bit of thickness. And of course, this is something, like most facial features, is going to vary and be different, have variables on different people. Some's going to be longer, pointier, shorter, pointing backward, pointing forward. There's a lot of variance. But in this case, we have this as a starting point. So just think of it as a slab like that. We're going to imagine that that is back there. And then we're going to draw just a very basic cylinder tube all the way around the rim of it. Not all the way, just from here. Well, let's go from here because it goes inward and merges with the geometry of the rest of the face. And we're not going to do the indents or anything just yet, but this tube just wraps around like this, cutting through this part for now, and merges again over here with this part, but we'll get to that later. And it has a tubular quality like this. So if at the very least you can draw a worm snake tube thing that goes around a rim like that, you're off to a great start. Now, of course, it gets thinner and thicker in certain areas, but we'll get to that. All right, so turn that off for a second. Now we're going to look at this. This is probably the most confusing part, but it can be simplified. Now, I like to kind of think of this as a fork in the road. If you have a path, right, one path will lead up this way, right, and the other will lead up that way. Just always remember that. Split in the road, a fork in the road, because over here, the path starts and winds this way. Like, uh-oh, which way do I go? This way or this way? This is essentially a tube cylinder, like that, in a very low poly simplification of it. And then it comes forward into this kind of complex area. It's still a tube like that, but it changes geometry a bit. Right, so you have it connecting. It's almost like it goes like a sandworm underground and then back up again like this. Right, and it merges with that part of the cheek right there. Right, so we have two parts. We have the outer ring and then the pathway. So let's kind of look at it as a top-down view, just a simplified way. Almost think of it like a map. We have a big outer ring and a fork in the road. Let's bring this down over here. The fork in the road that kind of starts from in a winding towards the left side and then splits apart into two roads over here. And that same path goes this way and then down, and it does another windy thing. And the windy thing sort of echoes the shape of that bottom part of the ring. And then inward again. And, it goes sort of like underground and then out and then again, right? So if you can almost imagine this as like a map of a town. Let's actually correct that real quick. You know, there's like some deep caves in here, and the only safe place is to walk on top of this road. It's like you start here, you can walk all the way down and turn and kind of feel all the different twists and turns, and then suddenly find the fork in the road. That's one way to remember it. And then you can sort of just shade in all of this stuff. And because the actual hole is in there, we can erase this part. But if you know the basic map of it, you can turn it into 3D. So let's bring this back and sort of do the same thing. We'll use red and imply the cylinder tube that goes all the way around. This is the rim. All right, we're just going to follow that geometry, and it turns inward this way, meaning there's going to be shadow on that right here. I'm just going to keep going. It's going to merge a little bit with the flatness and then come out again. So it's going to be flat and then thick again. Again, it's quite complex, and it might require that you just keep looking at reference when you're drawing ears, but just remember the fork in the road and it'll make things easier. And now we have the winding part over here, splitting off into two. And then you can almost imagine, if you rotate it, you can imagine the negative space here as a sort of lake or a duck. Oh my God. So yeah, you know, this shape definitely has, like, you could fit a bowling ball or a bowling pin in there. You could fit a duck. You could fit maybe a hair dryer. Right. So try to remember these simple things as shapes that you can really easily recall to find out the actual shape of that. Okay, so let's get that. I'm just going to turn my head and draw the beak of the duck. Go up and out again. Okay, let's let that windy road happen. And the geometry will do something like this. And just like that, with magic of simplifying the shapes, you have the geometry of the ear. Obviously very simplified, and it's just a quick kind of crash course into understanding the geometry of it so that your paintings will have at least a little bit more information and informative quality to it instead of just doing a blurred ear. All right, so if we were to quickly render this, lay in some values, and we're going to draw on top of it with some highlights. Not being too accurate, we're just going to be rough and loose, and knowing that the cylinder is going to be receiving light in a very particular way, and it flattens out a little bit here. This part of the ear is going to receive light like this because the geometry pushes it out, and then a little bit of light there because when the tube curves, it's going to be receiving light because it's aiming upward. Bit of highlight here on that part of that cylinder tube. And then here it gets thinner again. And it splits off like that. And that whole area kind of blends in a little bit. And we could go ahead and put a shadow here. Oops. And let's let that highlight kind of come through like that. And then we just draw the cave over here. Cave of Wonders, Cave of Ducks, Cave of whatever shape that you might find in there. And if we just smooth it all together and render it out, maybe put a shadow here, we have what could be a start of a believable ear. What a strange, strange part of the human body. And we're just so used to seeing it on people. We're just going to loosely blend this in with the airbrush, knowing that this part blends in with the cheekbone here, like that. And we can darken this up there. Let's lighten this up here. You'll notice I'm not really accurate with the forms regarding the actual reference, But that's not the point here. The point is to understand the basics of the geometry so that we can manipulate that later if we want for stylization. Turning it into a pointy ear for an elf, we could easily just take this tube here and then pull it up this way and pull the tube here and make it a bit pointy, right? But we'll know that the geometry is going to be cylindrical, and you could obviously vary that, but that will be the geometry of the ear. And you could even take that fork in the road and stretch it out upward like this, right? And that is the quick crash course on how to understand the geometry of the ear, at least for this model. So for our painting over here, I do notice that the cranium feels a little bit small. We're just going to add some volume there. Just shade in the hair here a little bit. I know the proportions are a bit off. The eyes are a little bit big, which is fine. I'm going to do some minor adjustments here. All right, cool. That's fine. So let's just lay in the ear. Overall, the values are pretty dark, so I'm going to lay in a big mid-tone over here. Very lightly, not too dark. And just to make things easier, I'm going to put in this little triangle of a shadow to kind of be an anchor point to build everything on top of. And so just going to shade that in. And I know that this rim area is going to be tube-like. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that highlight here as if it was a cylinder, which means it'll also cast this little shadow here. And the fork in the road, we could do that by painting the negative space there to reveal that little fork. Shadow side over here. And then of course the highlight on that cylinder area. It gets thin here, it overlaps the outer rim, comes back in, and gives us a nice area to put our duck. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and put in the highlight on that tube of the inner ear on this side and let it blend in with the values of the cheek and put a subtle little indication of the underlying cylinder underneath, or tube. And now there's a bit of a highlight here which kind of comes up and merges with this stuff over here. And let's kind of complete that fork in the road winding thing. And there you have it. I mean, it's a very rough and crude way to do it, but that's how I would indicate and simplify it. Of course, you can get in there and blend it in, which actually we will do right now. So this part should be blended in a little bit. And it's pretty sharp edged right here, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to bring in some shading here. Let's pull that highlight down a little bit. It's missing a bit of a peak highlight here. Okay. And we can blend in up here as well. Maybe bring out that highlight that's overlapping the outer rim. I've always, for the longest time, avoided learning how to draw the form of the ear. So it's nice to kind of just review it once and for all. And this is actually catching more of a highlight right there. But at least, you know, when I'm doing this, the worst thing I could do is like sit there and try to draw the shapes and be accurate with that. The better way to go about it is to understand the forms and just try to communicate that, because then you can interpret it your own way and make things longer and more aesthetic if you want, shorter, pointier. Okay. And that looks good to me for now. The thing that I tend to find with my studies and paintings is that I'll lay something in like this, and then because I'm staring at it, I don't really see things that are standing out. When I take a break and I come back and I look at it, I'll notice like, oh, the angle of this is slightly off, or the values are too bright here, or the value grouping isn't where it should be, and it's too dark here and too dark there. So, don't shoot yourself in the foot if you're not nailing everything the first time. I make mistakes all the time. It's revisiting it over and over, learning from your own mistakes. That's how you learn. Don't be too hard on yourself if you don't get it right away. Cool. That will be the end of this part.